Hey everyone, this is GM Josh Friedel. Today I'm going to do another autopsy video. So again, it's just my regular series, and the basic theme is to go over the game from the person who lost point of view, and try to figure out where they went wrong and what were the mistakes that really led to their downfall. Rather than what you typically do when you go over games, you almost look at it from the winning player's perspective usually, and you try to figure out what exactly they did right. Here we're actually trying to figure out what someone does wrong. Um, so I chose again the Olympiad to go over games. I chose one women's game and one open game. And in this one, this was the women's game I wanted to start with first. This was the last round, a very important game, as it turned out, between Alexandra Kosteniuk and Wenjun. And it was an important game because it looked like in this match between Russia and China, China was just getting thrashed. And had they lost, Russia would have moved up to tie with them, and actually Ukraine would have taken the gold medal. But in a very unexpected turn of events, somehow Russia did not end up winning this match, and this game was a large part of it. So in one game, the Chinese players simply got destroyed. The other was a quick draw, and then on board 4, it looked like it was completely killing for black, but the king was still open. There was a chance for a draw, but certainly not of a loss. So as white in this position, Kosteniuk only needed to draw. And it looks, of course, very equal. And I would say, to call this position equal is an exaggeration. Black has a slightly better queen. The d-pawn is a little bit weaker on d4 than on d6. So to call this position equal, I think, is slightly irresponsible. But it's definitely very, very close to a draw. But of course, after a result like this, especially with so much pressure on the players and all of this, people kind of dismiss, like, oh man, how can you lose a position like this? And the answer actually is very easily. Even much stronger players like 27, 2750 could easily lose this for white. And the reason is because you have to there's still, especially if your opponent's in a position they have to beat you, they're probably going to push pretty hard, meaning you're not going to get like an easier draw. So in some ways that actually makes black's attitude better. And from white's perspective, I don't think that she had to play for a draw really made a huge difference. If she had to win this position, it would just be impossible. But she would be playing for a draw anyway, so I don't think in this case the results that she needed really had too much of an impact, at least on how she plays the position. But the reason why a position like this can be so easy to lose, and imagine if it's easy to lose for a GM, how easy it would be to lose for, say, a 2000 player, an 1800 player, a 1600 player. And the reason is because you have to make many, many correct decisions. And that doesn't sound too crazy, but the problem is that every position you're going to have at least one opportunity to make an incorrect decision. And one incorrect decision, in some cases, can just mean you lose right away. In some cases, it means your defense is much harder, your position has become worse. And in other cases, it just means that you have to play that many more accurate moves to draw. So the price of an inaccuracy is so high, and think of how many moves, how many chances you have to make that inaccuracy. Now, of course, this position is holdable, and I would expect if you threw this position in front of me, told me a 2550 GM or about whatever her rating is, how would she do as white? I would say she would hold most of the time. But the fact is that it's not going to be every time. And especially you include the pressure of the given situation, and there's pressure on both players, of course. I don't want to dismiss the pressure on black to actually win. But I think that it can definitely lead to poor decision making. Honestly, overall, and this is kind of crazy to say because, she did lose this position and it was considered such a big miss for her. But I actually think overall she actually defended this position very well. But the problem was she made one or two bad decisions, and that's kind of all it takes. But I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. I don't want to give away everything. So in this position, she played a move which I don't hate, and it may not even be an objective mistake, but it's not something I like to do. She played the move h4. Which looks quite reasonable, right? You shoo the knight away, it goes back to e6, you go knight f3, it looks like you have things under control. The problem with a move like h4, I find, is that it's quite inflexible. And it kind of gives black all the possibilities. So for example, Let's say you play a pass move here. And by the way, playing pass moves is an extremely important skill and important thing you have to learn to do in a position like this. The reason why is very simple, that you just don't have building moves. You don't have that many improving moves. So if you do not know how to play pass moves, a position like this will be impossible to defend, because you're just going to worsen your pieces. Your queen and knight are in the center. Obviously, if the knight moves back to e6, you need f3 available. You don't want to put the knight on b3, where it's just silly looking and only defends the pawn. You want an f3 covering your king. So the move I would maybe consider is just king h2. Again, basically saying, pass your move, show me what you got. And the reason why a position like this should be drawn is because, especially the way things are now, there just isn't that much black can do. So black can play similarly to how she did in the game by playing knight e6 and g5. But you can even play a move like queen d3 and basically just sit. Now, black can play the idea of h5, g4, similar to how she played. But I actually think that it gives white maybe a few more defensive chances, partially because you're not required to take. And in some instances, taking this pawn actually makes your life harder. And even if you do take, at the very least, you'll transpose. So you have a chance to transpose, but maybe you could actually even do better. And for the moment, at least, you keep your king slightly better, in better shape with the pawn on h3. So I don't know. It's easy to play a move like h4 because it feels like you're playing more forcing chess. But the fact is that sometimes I think just holding back and actually waiting for your opponent to extend can be a better defensive choice. But this is just a choice. I wouldn't be surprised if she obviously disagreed, and I wouldn't be surprised if other strong players would disagree with me as well in this one. But it's just my personal preference. So knight e6, knight f3, g5 as predicted. And here, because the pawn's on h4, you have absolutely no choice on what to do. You pretty much have to take, otherwise you just have another weakness probably. To say you have to take is maybe too much, but the pawn on h4 is definitely would rather be back on h3 in my opinion. So she plays king h2, so it's all very similar. Black plays king g6. White plays queen d3 check. And here black makes a very nice decision of playing queen f5. So this is already one of the many pitfalls. You would think, wow, reduced material, trading queens probably is even better. But she very correctly chooses not to take. Taking the queen would be very poor, because now this king is far superior to this king, and the d-pawn is still a weakness. Note how the king's coming into e4 next, and quite honestly, it wouldn't be surprised if white were completely lost here. Notice also how once black plays f6, this knight is actually really terrible. So that doesn't contribute to white's happiness either. She played queen c3, which is quite understandable. If she had more time, and this is one of the issues, sometimes you don't have tons of time in a position like this, so it's hard to make decisions. I don't know the exact time situation, but I would guess that, again, it's later in the endgame. It's only move 46, so probably she had a little time. But the move queen e3 might have been better, and the main reason is very simple, that you want to keep the queen kind of controlling all the central squares if you can. So the idea is that it's, keeping the queen in the center, it keeps black out of e4, which is where it went in the game. But that you have to realize that after queen f4 check, you can defend, because obviously, you don't really want to trade queens again with the king closer to the center. But apparently that one tempo makes a difference, because after queen takes, black has to make an unpleasant choice. You either take with the g-pawn, and now you have weak pawns, your king's still farther away, and it gives white the opportunity to play a very strong move d5, with the very simple idea that after knight c7, you don't even have to lose a pawn, because you play knight d2, followed by knight c4. And due to the weak pawns, due to the fact that after takes here, you're just going to agree to a draw very soon. So, of course, black can play knight takes f4. But even here, you can play the move g3. And some of the same ideas apply, because again, that king is just one square over. Notice how if we take this position, if black tries to play with d5, for example, you just go back, and you're just too slow, because the king can go access e6. So sometimes one tempo makes all the difference when it comes to evaluating endgames. But again, that's a very tough decision to make. So she chooses to avoid the queen trade entirely. But now after queen e4, she has a tougher choice, because the queen simply occupies a better square now. g4 is definitely on the horizon, and it's not actually so easy to play. So she chooses to activate her queen, which is a decision I like. She plays queen c8. So basically she's saying, you can't really take the d4 pawn now, But she's basically saying you might be able to take the d4 pawn at some point, but my queen's going to be so active it's going to make life difficult for you. So king f6 was played, queen h8 check, king e7. And here there were a couple inaccuracies, but again, it's hard to expect players to play perfectly a position like this. Probably white should again pass. And the idea is that, say you play king g1, if black tries to play g4, you play knight d2, you check, and then bring the knight back. And the problem is that black has just so many weaknesses here. You're going to play knight e3 next, this g-pawn's going to fall. So even though you've dropped a pawn, you're going to have huge counterplay. But again, not easy to play this way during game. She played queen h5. And black did have the opportunity to play f6 now, which might be a little annoying just because this queen doesn't have that many squares. And again, f6 kills this knight. And this knight really is one of white's big problems. So black played queen f5 instead, which is understandable. And now Kosteniuk finds the correct idea. And this is what I mean about I actually think that she defended quite well, because she discovered here that, look, if I try to hold on to all my pawns, I'm just going to be too passive. So she actually sacrifices a pawn for activity, which is, again, a decision I really like. So check, queen e4. You can't take on g5, of course, because of queen f4 check, important to note. So the problem with having a slightly open king. She plays king back to g1, f6, queen h8. So here she ends up playing the same idea. g4, knight h2. She goes to h2 rather than d2. I still like d2 just because it forces the queen to take on d4, which is a little awkward, but maybe not a huge deal. So f5, she throws a check and plays knight f1. Knight takes d4, knight e3. So I really like this play by Kosteniuk because she realized that she just can't hold on to everything, and therefore she decided to sacrifice the pawn in order to activate her knight. So you might think, well, black's made some serious progress. And in some ways it's true. Black's won a pawn. Winning a pawn is definitely not a bad thing. The advantage white has, however, is that now black's king is completely out in the open, and white's pieces are all active. Remember this garbage knight on f3? Now it's on a really nice square. And this pawn can't really advance. So I'd say that as long as white can keep this pawn at bay, I don't even think white's really that much worse, because white can just keep checking forever. Of course, you'd rather be blacking up the pawn, but it's actually very difficult to ever make progress. So I think this was an excellent judgment call by white, and it could be she was forced into it, but I think it's more likely that this was just what she realized she had to do. But again, I don't think any of this is why she ended up losing her game. Now again, the time got very low, so that probably contributed as well. I would say that one of the most underestimated keys to holding a position like this when you're defending is not to play too slowly. Almost always, if I have black here, I'm not necessarily going to try to just push ahead. If I think I have a strong move, I'm going to play it, of course, if I think I'm given a chance. But mostly I'm going to fiddle around a little and see if my opponent wastes their time. This is a trick that almost all GMs use. They fiddle around a lot just to see if their opponents get low on time, because I'd rather my opponent have to defend this position with 3 minutes on their clock compared to 30 or 20 or 15 even. So making sure that you obviously have to play accurately, meaning you don't want to play instantly usually, unless you have a very obvious move. But you don't want to take more than, say, 3 minutes unless you believe it's a move that's absolutely crucial. Like when she sacked the pawn, probably she took some time, which is understandable. But if you're not playing a move that's absolutely crucial, you just want to hold the position, play as simply as you can, and play quickly. Because if you play too slowly in a position like this, you might play genius moves for 20 moves, but if you use up all your time, you're not going to be able to defend necessarily when you do have to make the important decisions. So what I like to do is see if they waste time and then let them make the important decisions when they're low on time, rather than when they have time. From the defending perspective, you really just want to play fast so they can't force that on you. You want to make sure you keep your time for when you do have to make those key decisions. So king c8, black played. White gave some checks. Queen e7, queen d5, queen e5, queen b7, queen c8. And again, it doesn't really matter where you check necessarily, as long as you keep black under control. Checks on c4, knight retreated, g3. Not a bad move. You do weaken f3, which can prove a little bit annoying, but it's worthwhile to keep these pawns kind of restrained. Because again, this knight does an excellent job of attacking the pawns and keeping everything controlled. So king g6 was played, queen c8, knight d4, queen g8 check, queen g7. And this was a moment where I kind of disagree with her. It's easy to keep throwing checks, but I would say that unless you have a perpetual, and it's quite clear that white does not have a perpetual here, your main focus should actually not be on checking, but it should be on making sure everything is held. What I mean by that is making sure there are no moves that come at you, that you're kind of keeping your pieces as active as possible. So I would say that, yes, if you think you have a perpetual, checks have to be looked at. But if there's no perpetual, then you don't necessarily have to put preference on a check. And this is a trick, again, that a lot of GMs use. I would say that lower rated players always want to check, especially if it's a queen endgame or a queen and knight endgame. And checking has the advantage of you can predict your opponent's move a bit easier. But there are times when, at least in my opinion, it's just not worthwhile to check. And this is one of those times. I would probably just play queen d5. Centralize my queen, hit this knight, hit the both pawns. There's nothing more you can ask of a move. Of course, black could play queen back d5, but then you give a check on g8, and then you ask the king where it's going. So black can't really centralize the queen. And note how the queen centralization was how we got into trouble in the first place with queen e4. So keeping queens in the center, especially when there are few pieces on the board, is very crucial. So I really like this move. Probably black should play here. So giving a check on g8 is possible, but doesn't do much. But again, as you know, I don't care about checking so much. I'll just play, king g2. So again, looks like nothing much is going on, but the fact is, black has to find a way to do something now. I have queen g8 check always. The queen can't really go anywhere. So how is black going to really make progress? Why is black even better? Obviously, you'd rather be up the pawn, but the fact is that black cannot do anything here. So I really like this move, queen d5. And again, it's based on the fact that I don't really have an attachment to giving checks unless I believe that my opponent can't get out of them. But here, after queen e8 check, queen f7, the queen doesn't have that nice central square. So she moves to c8. Is this horrible? Not necessarily. But it definitely makes her life a little bit harder. Knight f3 check, king g2. And this is what I mean, by the way, about slight inaccuracies. If she had kept her queen in the center, in all likelihood, she just draws. Because she didn't, she's still completely drawn, but it's that much harder. Now imagine she makes another slight inaccuracy, which we'll get to. Maybe then she becomes much worse again. So again, it's really about, it's very difficult to just keep making accurate moves, or at least not making errors, for any level of player. So you really have to keep your concentration so well in positions like this. And it's part of why people win them. So knight g5, king f1 she played, which is not a bad move, getting off that diagonal to avoid checks, queen e6, queen d8, knight f3, and then this was a critical moment. Now, I don't want to say it's critical as in she only has one move here. That's probably not accurate. But I would say that what she plays here does matter. So when you have a position like this, her queen's not in the center. That's definitely slightly annoying. There's no real great checks. There's no way she can perpetual here. So then there's only one focus. And this is where playing quickly and playing sort of practically come into play. Your move, first of all, has to not blunder anything. You want to make sure that it doesn't blunder, but also you have to make sure that your opponent's ideas are kept under wraps. There are two ideas that I can see for black. One is to try to go for checkmate. At the moment, I don't think black can do so. But the second idea is to push the d-pawn. So all your move has to do is make sure black cannot go for checkmate and not push the g-pawn. So again, my choice would probably be king g2. Notice how there's no, if knight e1 check, I just move back, big deal. Queen e4 runs into queen takes d6 check, or maybe even queen g8 check. It's just not, it's not going to actually give checkmate. Even if you get a position like this, I didn't actually check this one, but yeah, even if you play, you have to be a little careful because knight h4 is a double check. But even if you just go here, I don't really see how you're getting mated. Note how queen b1 check runs into queen d1, very important. This knight on e3 is on a very, very nice square. So even here, you can give a check on h2, but I just move, queen b1 check, queen d1. There's no real way you're going to get mated here. And that's very important. So king g2 would have been nice, and it forces black again to figure out what they're going to do. If the knight moves, you can move your king again. So maybe she didn't want to move her king there, but there could have been other moves too. For example, a move like queen a8 might have been just fine, keeping the long diagonal, keeping an eye on the d5 square. She played the move queen b8, which seems similar, but it lets slip the d-pawn. And this is why it is so easy to go astray. All you have to do is forget about the d-pawn for one move, and your life becomes immeasurably harder. So the main lesson, again, is when you're playing these positions, when you're defending, you have to make sure your opponent's ideas, you have a very clear grasp of what they're trying to do. One is going for checkmate, the other is pushing the d-pawn, and you have to make sure you cover both ideas, and you have to stay focused on this objective the whole time. If you don't have perpetual check, if you don't have forcing moves that are very strong, and of course they take precedence, your move, number one, should make sure they can't push. Now again, it could be that you decide pushing the d-pawn is no big deal, but we get kind of to why bother territory, as in, why exactly should I worry about this d-pawn? Why should I allow it in the first place? And in this case, I'm pretty sure she just didn't realize it could be pushed here, or she just, whether she lost concentration, whether she just forgot about it, played too quickly, it's hard to say. At some point in this endgame also, she thought she claimed a perpetual, and she didn't. And it could be that throws you off too. When you make a claim and it doesn't work out or whatever, it can kind of distract both players. So one of the main things is, whether you make a claim or not, you want to make sure that that focus remains. Because chess is not a forgiving game. I compare it to tennis just because I happen to play tennis. But tennis, you make one stupid shot or you don't pay attention 1 point, you lose 1 point. Now, that could be a big point, but it ultimately is 1 point. In chess, you make one little lapse and your position can become quite bad. And things can get worse or turn on a dime very quickly. So again, the demands on your attention are really big. So king g2, d4, knight c2, d3. So where'd this pawn come from? Now we have a stupid d2 pawn to worry about. So her life has become much more difficult, but she still defends admirable. Queen d8, queen c7 check, queen d8 check. They're just kind of dancing around. I think maybe around here she claimed the perpetual. I'm not entirely sure. But it definitely threw her off. Because in this position, she now decided to go for something which was probably not a good idea. It didn't end up being her losing move, but it definitely could have been. So again, you need a move which keeps everything under control. There's no perpetual. You want to keep an eye on the d-pawn and keep an eye on the mate. This knight on e3, to me, is on a perfect square. I would not want to touch that guy. My queen, perfect square. I cover g8, I cover the d-pawn. So what's left? King f1. So again, you have to calculate queen a6 check, knight e1 check. But again, they just don't lead anywhere. I can go back. If knight e1 check, I can just go to g1, for example. And again, the d-pawn is not going anywhere. This king is wide open, so black actually has to be careful nothing happens to it. And again, you don't even have to, you're not even threatening to take this pawn. But probably black has to go back. You can move your king. Now you are threatening it. King back to g2, for example. Again, I'm not 100% sure. You obviously have to be calculating all the time, making sure queen c6 is never a big deal and moves like that. You have to be always careful. But I would say that the main thing is just to keep an eye out for checks and tempo moves, keep an eye out for this d-pawn. She played the move knight d5. And this kind of mistake happens all the time. There is no chess player on the planet, I don't care what their style is, who wants to be passive all game. For her to have to just sit there with her knight and queen and not move is very difficult for any player. Especially you're tired, you're at the end of the game. There's this temptation that you want to force the draw. You want to force your opponent to give you a draw. And that's what this move is designed to do. Now, if you play knight d5 and it does force a draw, obviously it's a move you should play. So there is a double-edged notion to it. But I would say that, for example, if you have 2 minutes on your clock, if you have 1 minute on your clock, you don't want to play this move. Because it's not that forcing. There are so many moves black can play here that the likelihood that it's a drawing move is definitely there. I'm not saying that it's impossible that it doesn't draw right away, but I'd say it's unlikely. Black just has too many moves. Black has king g7, black has king h7. There are just too many possibilities, and to calculate them in that span of time, I just think is not possible. So part of it is you have to be very patient, very resilient, and you have to really be willing to just sit. So the move King F1, I think she could have played that move in, say, 30 seconds. So keep in mind there's a 30-second increment. She doesn't lose any time. So you want to stick to moves you can play in under a minute. You want to stick to those kind of moves for the most part. Again, if you think that you're lost if you just play a normal move, then hey, go for it. But that's clearly not the case here. King F1, she still holds it together very nicely. So knight d5, I think, is the start of things going wrong for her. And again, it's very understandable. People do not want to just sit there. So on this move, King h7, it turns out, would have been deadly. But this is something that's very, very difficult to actually realize during a game. And Wenjun understandably missed it. So, for example, if knight f6 check, you can just go king h6. And you kind of get your pieces stuck. Because check, king g6, and where'd your pieces go? They were covering everything. Now they're a mess. And there's no stalemate tricks, which is very important. So if knight back to e3, now black has the very strong move queen c6. Note how, because the king's not on g6, you don't have the move queen g8 check anymore, which would have been a draw. And that's kind of the key point, that the king on h7 is actually very annoyingly placed. Because now, for example, if you play queen e7 check, I simply play king g6, I believe, and you're kind of out of moves. You don't have any checks anymore, and your king has a real problem. So this would be kind of a disaster. Note also how king f1 check, king f1 no longer works because of queen c1 check. Another important detail. So just because things are kind of covered, once there's a pawn on d2, once you have a pawn that's really threatening you, bad things can happen. But after knight e3, queen c6, knight d1 might be a better try. But even here, you can play knight d4 check, queen e4, and it's basically kaput because these pieces are too strong. Queen e1 check is in the air. Knight f3 check is in the air. There's just way too many threats. And there's no perpetual because, again, the king's on h7. Very, very important detail. So knight d5, as it turned out, would have been bad. She played queen f7. So now queen d6 check. King back to g7. And this was, again, another important moment. When you have a defense your opponent can't really crack that easily, it's very important. Most times you do not want to change your defense. You don't want to change your tactic. If you have one that your opponent has not been able to crack, stick with it. And this is a case where knight e3 still would have held things together a little bit better. Because again, the knight controls the queening square. It makes perfect sense. Now, does it mean that you're not going to get mated somehow? Maybe not. Maybe she thought after, moves like queen b7, she was worried about, not immediately because the pawn hangs, but, she could have been worried about many, many things here. But the fact is that you have to at least make your opponent find these moves, and you have to make them do stuff. And as it turns out, I don't think there's that much after knight e3. She can definitely hang on here. As it happened, however, she played knight f4, and now after black just simply moves the king away, white doesn't have any good moves. This knight does not cover this pawn anymore. This king can't really go anywhere. And all of a sudden, there are serious, serious problems. Note how queen b7 is going to come into play in some lines. There's just too many things going on. And the fact is that white just can't really hope to defend against everything. So finally, she kind of falls apart. She plays knight e6, but in reality, she had nothing she could do. Black plays d1 queen, and the end came pretty quickly. The key is, of course, you don't slip up here and play a move like queen takes knight, allowing check. This would be rather embarrassing, of course, with the stalemate idea. But Wenjun is not going to do that. She plays king g8, leaving white with this stupid knight. And once she won the knight, she wins pretty easily. They played on a few moves. I like this move, knight g5, just consolidating, saying there's no way you're stalemating. I'm just going to take my time. King up, queen out, and white gave up. So kind of a heartbreaking game for Russia because they played such a good match. It looked like they were just going to beat China down. But board 4, her king was a little bit open, which in my opinion made that win a little harder to convert. So it was up to Kosteniuk. And again, I don't think she played that badly. I'm sure she's going to get maligned horribly because of this game. But the fact is that it was a very difficult position to hold, regardless if computers are screaming equal the whole time. And it's a real pet peeve of mine when people really quote that, because, again, it's nothing to do with how it is to experience this during a game. Never mind a high-pressure situation. But the fact is that, you have to make so many good decisions, and she made a few too many mistakes. So again, the main takeaways, I think, from this are when you have that good defensive setup, try to stick to it unless your opponent shows they can crack it. Because, again, if you try to switch defensive setups, that's where trouble comes into play. Keep an eye on your opponent's main ideas. In this case, push the d-pawn, go for checkmate. Had she kept an eye on both ideas, that d-pawn never would have made it to d2. She probably holds. Obviously, you keep an eye out for tempo moves for both you and your opponent, but that, again, given in any position. But really, keeping an eye on your opponent's ideas and, making sure you kind of hold the fort down. The other one, I guess, is don't make moves that you can't calculate in your allotted time. Knight d5, very complicated move. There's no way she could calculate that properly in the given time. She could have at least just held the fort, made her opponent find a win. Alright, so let's move on to the next game. So this match was, I'd say, not as crucial. Ukraine against Czech Republic. But definitely it was up there, and these were teams that were vying for maybe not medals, but were playing for the top. I would have shown a game that had a bit more bearing on the final result, but the fact was that the top teams played real boring games. Hate to tell you guys, not a criticism, but it's just true. Those were some boring games on most of the top boards. I have to say the Nepomniachtchi's win was kind of nice, but it was also very brief. I would have been able to do an autopsy for 5 seconds and said, sorry, bad luck. But, okay. Enough of that. So this was a position where it was a long, long endgame. So it looks like White's kind of trying to draw blood from a stone, right? Actually, let's look at it from Stocek's point of view. This was, White was Yury Kryvoruchko, and Black was Jiri Stocek. And again, crucial game in the team results and all this. But okay, I mean, both these guys clearly tired. End of a long, long, long event, and Black has to defend this position. It's not exactly fun. But at the same time, it looks like the advantage is so minuscule. And, really it looks like White's trying to draw blood from a stone, but I know Kryvoruchko pretty well, and this really fits into his style of play. He's so good at playing these very, very slight edges and just keep putting pressure until the opponent snaps. And that's sort of what happened here. So in this position, Black played the move bishop d7, which is kind of understandable. But one of the keys, and I think it's very important, is that you have a position like this. It's a little bit different from the previous one. The previous one, there were no real great ways for Kosteniuk to be super active. She did get the queen and knight active, and that compensated for the pawn. But the fact was that keeping her pieces active was very difficult. One of the main things she had to do was just kind of hold down the fort. And Black can definitely try to hold down the fort here, but I think that it's going to be very difficult to do it from here. And again, my priority, I would say, would be always to look for activity. And I think that in this position, he could have gotten active with the move rook g8. And the idea, of course, is that the rook's going to try to get loose. If rook takes f5, you run into this, and the opposite bishop endgame, of course, is a draw. And after h4, you also have the very clever rook g4. And again, opposite color bishop endings, you always have to be careful, but the fact is that, even though this h-pawn looks very nasty, the bishop can stop it, and if the king ever runs, this pawn can run, and you're just going to not have any pawns left. For example, after here, let's say this move, you can even just go around, and then the second the king tries to come in, you can play this move. Now, I actually should have been a little bit more careful, maybe, because I'm allowing king h6, king g7. But okay, this was kind of my bad. I didn't realize that this would be happening. So, all right, I have to admit that was a bit moronic. This is why I should input lines first. So probably in this position, the f pawn shouldn't be pushed. You could even you can probably just let me see. Oy. So you have to be always accurate. It's very tricky. But the idea is that this endgame almost certainly is a draw. It's a matter of playing it accurately. But the basic idea, just to show you what I'm kind of going for here, is that you want to make sure want to make sure that the G pawn can get sacked, the bishop takes, and then you take the B pawn. The advantage here, by the way, actually, and can't believe I didn't even realize this, is that even if you get this, let's even assume you pitch the F pawn somehow. Like whatever, black takes the F pawn. Even this is going to be a draw, because you can get this kind of position, and again, I'm just going to make this easier. Let's say you get this bishop runs. I realize this is a little bit off topic, but the basic idea, of course, is that even this position, believe it or not, is a fortress. You can't let the king here, which is quite clear, but the fact is you can never actually force this king out, because there's always stalemate, and again, the bishop can't really go anywhere, so you can... The most you can do is kind of force... Let's say here, so, I mean, okay, you can go here, but just to illustrate, you can force the king here, is all you can do. But you can never force it out, and I'm just going to go back. So this is actually a fortress, which is kind of important, especially if white's king can get over in time. But okay, this is something that's fairly easy to, during a game, I'm sure he would have noticed this. But that's kind of the key idea, that you want to get your rook active and then be ready to trade for the pawn. And that's probably the easiest way to try to draw. Now, you have to be careful with this king, but the fact is that there's no way to checkmate with just the rook. So for example, if the rook tries to move back, you can even play here and try to block from the rook, but the bishop is needed to actually ever give mate here. So you have to be a little careful. After a move like this, you have to watch out for checks and whatnot. So maybe instead you should actually play rook g2, just to make sure you have checks and stuff. And again, if check here, it's just not a huge deal. Again, the bishop would be needed to create any threats here. So again, I mean, the main theme here, which I obviously went on a slight tangent, but the main theme I was trying to go for is that you don't have that many chances for activity usually, so if you have one, you should really try to take it. So a move like rook g8, that's worth, remember how I talked about moves to spend your time on? That's worth a few minutes of your time playing rook g8. Now, I don't know what the time situation was here. This was move 60. Maybe they were playing an increment, in which case, again, you're just trying to play some moves. But I would definitely really struggle to do that, because now, even though it looks kind of nice, and his king does get out, which is the one advantage, as we'll see, it's at least a little annoying, because now you really are down a pawn. So once again, we get to this kind of situation where you have to watch for your opponent's ideas. And white's main idea here is to push that h-pawn. So black really has to keep an eye on that, and the secondary idea is to go after the b-pawn. So let's go to a more crucial position. Bishop c4. Again, a lot of these moves don't matter so much. There are just many possibilities. Checks. Go back. And it's kind of important, if you're helping the king here, it's bad, but because there's bishop e6 check, the king can't go there. So again, black goes king c3. I don't know what the king's doing on c3 exactly, but it's probably not such a bad move. They fiddle around. Rook f6. Now the king tries to go back. And this is where I kind of disagree. So remember how I talked about checking for the sake of checking? There's no perpetual here. So I see no value in throwing in checks. So I don't like this continuous checking. Again, if it's me, I want to improve a piece. What piece don't I like? Well, this king could be slightly closer. So I would play this. King b5. And as we'd see, this actually makes black's life a lot easier, because you're in a position to guard this pawn. One of white's main ideas is maybe to try to sack a rook for this pawn someday, but it's going to be almost impossible with a king this close. So I think that bringing the king back here would have been a very nice idea. He instead gave checks, which again, I don't hate, but you just helped your opponent's king. So again, one of the main themes from both this game and the previous one is do not have an attachment to checks unless they achieve something. And I would say that GMs do this more rarely. And my guess, again, is that Stocek did not have much time. But I find that amateurs do this all the time. So you want to look for your tempo moves. Checks are definitely tempo moves. I don't want to discourage looking for them. But unless you're achieving something with your checks, do not go out of your way to give them. Because in this case, all you achieved was putting white's king on a more annoying square. So you definitely want to watch your checks. Luckily, there's not too much to be done just yet. But it definitely can make life a little more annoying. So rook c4. Bishop back to g3. And this was another moment. So life's already become slightly more difficult. This king is actually a little annoying here because it's hidden from any kind of perpetuals, first of all. It's hitting this pawn. And you always have to watch out for the bishop sliding to c7 and some sort of weird exchange sack. But again, for most of these things to be effective, white needs a more threatening pawn. And in this position, it was very important to realize, wait a second, this pawn's going to try to move up. So I can understand not playing this move. This is an awkward looking move. You're putting your rook on what at least looks like an extremely awkward square. But the fact is that as long as the pawn is this passive, white really cannot do that much here. There's no real way to make threats. There's no real way to try to do much. I mean, for example, if white ever tries to sack here, you can probably just draw in numerous ways. The easiest might be just throwing in this check, king here, and there's no real way for white to actually make progress here. For example, if king here, you go here. Notice how with the pawns far back, it makes it even easier. But basically, you can't play b7. I'm just going to check and go back, stay attached to these pawns. This bishop can't move. This pawn can't really move either. So it's just not all that close. So rook h3, again, a hard move to play, but the fact is that keeping the h-pawn back is one of your two ideas. You have to prevent sacks and making sure you draw there, but you also have to keep the h-pawn back. So similar to the previous endgame, even though they're very different endgames, there's the same concept. You usually have one or two ideas of your opponent you have to keep an eye on, and every move you play should be eyeing their idea and at least discouraging it or preventing it in some way. So, and part of it is, because it's an endgame, you tend to have lots of moves at your disposal, all these bishop moves, all these king moves. It helps narrow your focus if you're focused on ideas. So I find that kind of focus really helps hold these positions. So bishop c6 was played, and now at least the pawn gets somewhere. So should this really end in misery for black? No. But the pawn's a little bit farther ahead, and I can tell you that probably Kryvoruchko was very happy now. He was like, okay, I'm making progress. I at least am showing my opponent, look, if you keep letting my pawn advance, your situation's going to become more dangerous. So black defended pretty well for a little while. Again, there's not much going on. The pawn got to h4, but in the scheme of things, it is a minor, kind of a minor push. So rook f4 check, rook back, bishop check, bishop here, rook f8, rook c8, and rook c7. Very, very clever move. And again, this is where we come to one of those crossroads. If you have lots of time and you calculate rook takes c7 as a draw, then take that rook. You know, you don't want to doubt yourself. I'm not saying doubt your calculations. I'm not saying, just trust your opponent implicitly. That's a horrible way to play chess. But the fact is, when you don't have time to calculate a line like this, it may look easy because it's opposite bishops with two pawns that are threatening you. But the fact is that it's not that easy to calculate it. So if you have a minute left, you know if you move your rook, you're still drawing in all likelihood. So for example, after rook h8, there's no way you're going to lose here. I don't want to say there's no way you're going to lose in the long run. Obviously, there's another mistake that can be made, but there's no way you're losing here. I should correct myself. So the idea is that if bishop e7 check, rook b7, you can just pin the bishop, which is kind of convenient. If rook takes b7, king here, there's just no way to make progress. King a7, king c6. Note how if the pawn ever pushes, you can pin it. This pawn can't move. Again, it looks kind of dangerous with the pawn so far advanced, but there are always tactics, there are always ways. And maybe he thought this was just losing for him, which is why he did what he did. But my guess would be that he simply, this is why making your opponents suffer in endgames like this is so effective. They want to end the suffering. They want it to make it so that, you know what, I'm sick of defending this position, I just want to draw right away by force. And we saw Kosteniuk do that too with knight d5. And again, it's a really big mistake. You have to be so patient. One of the reasons, for example, why Karyakin is such a tough defender is because he's willing to suffer for long periods of time. Now, do I want to say you should enjoy the suffering? That's going a bit too far. I don't think masochism is necessary to defend well. And I'm not saying to never look out for forced draws. Obviously, if you can end it, you make it less likely to blunder later. But you have to be very careful. Anytime you try to liquidate or try to simplify it, I mean, almost for sure Black-White calculated this when they played Rook C7, right? So you have to make absolutely certain that this is going to still be a draw for you, that this is going to draw the game. And it's so easy to want to end your suffering. I want to end my misery. You know, if Rook takes C7's it, that's it. It's so easy to have this attitude. But I think that it's a big mistake, and it's a large reason why people lose these positions, because they just don't want to suffer anymore. They're done. So being patient, being willing to at least suffer for a little while until your opportunities arise, until your opponent runs out of ideas, that's kind of the hallmark of a great defender. And again, if Stocek has no time on his clock here, especially, you just can't take that rook. I'm sorry, even if it draws right away, it's just not worthwhile. If you move your rook back to h8, even rook h5, there's no way your opponent's going to be able to win. You have to make sure rook takes b7 doesn't win, which, again, for a GM of this caliber, should not take too long. And once you realize that, you should be able to play it. Now, again, it could be I'm not seeing like some line which he calculated during the game which doesn't work for whatever reason. It's very possible to see ghosts in positions like this. But the key is to really hold up and only go for the liquidation when you're absolutely sure it works, and do not be in a huge rush to do it. So many players, I think, just rush that kind of thing, and again, as we can see, it really leads to their downfall in many positions. It happened to Kosteniuk, and here it happened to Stocek. So I think that this lesson of do not be too eager to kind of liquidate, too eager to just end your suffering, because again, in this case, his suffering did end quickly, but not in the way he hoped. Bishop f4 check is played, of course. B takes c7, so king b8 is a threat, you have to play king c8. The pawn gets to h5, which is important, because now there's only one square the bishop can and the bishop basically has to defend h7 all game now. Bishop e4, king b6, h6, and now white has a very, very simple winning plan. It will be easy to miss if you have no time, but the fact is that if you have no time, you can't trust to calculate this fully. There's just no way. This is, again, a very complicated and dangerous looking endgame, at least to me. And sure enough, white does have a winning idea. It's a very typical one. The bishop, now if the b-pawn didn't exist, you'd actually win this in the same way. You wouldn't actually necessarily have to do it in this way, but it's usually the simplest. Basically, you transfer your bishop here, and the idea is that the bishop helps guard the pawn from this direction, and then you're able to transfer your king. Notice how if the bishop had stayed here and you try to transfer your king, it doesn't work out so well, because at some point, this pawn just runs and then distracts this bishop. So even if you put your bishop here and go here, I distract your bishop, take your pawn, and it's an easy draw. But because the bishop's on a5, now you have a serious problem. That I go king here, and now, all of a sudden, if you just move your bishop, for example, I plant my bishop on b6 and I win by the same method. And unlike the previous position where the pawn was on b6, this is in fact a win, which I can illustrate very quickly here. Bishop goes over here. So at first it looks like, oh, is this a fortress? I'm afraid not. Obviously you're careful not to stalemate, but now you just go back. And the problem is the king goes to b6. So for example, b5 you can just take it. If king goes to b6, now you just need a bishop wasting move, tempo wasting move rather, and that is game over. So he played the move b5, which at first looks like, hey, this might be alright. But the problem now is white simply changes their plan. They play king back, and believe it or not, black has to resign. Because the bishop has to stay on this diagonal controlling h7, and if it moves, you take the b-pawn for an easy win. And if the king moves, of course, you go back to b8, b7. So, quite a game, right? And it seemed like it had all the earmarks of a draw. At first, it was even material, but even after you lose the pawn, it's just so hard to ever make progress with opposite bishops. But the fact is that first he let the h-pawn get a little further. Notice how this opposite bishop endgame probably would just be a draw if the pawn's back on h2, for example. But because the pawn got a little farther, it was able to make this more dangerous, and then taking the rook to begin with. And that was the major reason he lost. Again, I can't say what it was for sure. I didn't actually follow the games live. It was a bit early for me. But basically, if he had no time, then there's just no way he can make that decision responsibly. In order to take on z7, you have to be able to calculate all these lines. And in a minute, I just don't think even a very strong grandmaster, who Stocek definitely is, would be able to calculate it that accurately. And clearly he wasn't able to. And if you have time, then you just gotta be sure. I mean, it's nice to calculate ways to liquidate the position. Obviously, if you can end the suffering, if you can secure the draw and not risk further blunders, it's definitely worth doing. But you have to be absolutely certain and not feel like you have to do it as soon as humanly possible. Having the patience to be willing to defend for slightly longer, to make it so that your opponents really have to earn that win, is a really important skill to learn. And I think that people who learn that skill are the ones who end up becoming the real strong defenders. The Karyakins of the world, whoever you want to call the strong defenders. I think Ding Liren's a really excellent defender. He kind of knows how to do that. One of the reasons he hasn't lost in like 10 zillion games. But, not to mention guys like Carlsen are not the worst defenders in the world. But again, part of the hard part of defending is, knowing when to be active and when you have to just hold the fort down. And part of it is really disciplined decision making. You obviously want to try to be active whenever you can. If you have chances for activity when the alternative is being passive for a long time, you want to try to take them. But you also don't want to feel like, there are certain positions where you have to hold the fort down, where you have to just cover your opponent's threats, and you don't want to feel like if you don't get activity, you just want to resign or you just want to end it. Because those are the moments where people kind of lose the thread on the games. So again, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already done so. If you want to check out kind of teasers to future videos and stuff like that, check out my Patreon page. The link is below. Or if you want to donate to the series, you can do it there also. So once again, thank you very much, and I will see you guys next week.